Walk into a bike shop right now or scroll through almost any brand's website and you'll notice something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Everything is on sale. Not a modest discount here and there. Deep, aggressive, almost desperate price cuts on bikes that were flying off the shelves not long ago. Frames slashed by hundreds, complete bikes marked down by thousands. And your first instinct, quite reasonably, is joy. This is the best time in a generation to buy a bike. But here's the question that should be flickering at the back of your mind before you hand over your money. Why is all of this so cheap? Because a discount this big isn't generosity, it's a symptom. And the story behind it is one of the biggest business disasters the cycling world has ever seen. So let's answer the real question. How did an entire industry end up drowning in bikes nobody wanted? And when you buy one of these bargains, are you the winner? Or are you quietly inheriting someone else's problem? To understand the crash, you have to go back to the boom, because they are the same story. When the world shut down, something remarkable happened to cycling. Gyms closed, commutes vanished, and millions of people rediscovered the bicycle all at once. Demand exploded. In 1 year alone, bike imports into the United States climbed toward 18 million units. Electric bike sales grew by more than 200% in barely 2 years. Suddenly, there were hundreds of new brands, especially in e-bikes, all scrambling to feed a hunger that seemed bottomless. And that word, seemed, is where the whole thing begins to go wrong. Because the industry looked at that pandemic surge and made one enormous, fateful assumption. They assumed it was the new normal.
They assumed the demand would stay. It would not. Now, to see why that assumption was so dangerous, you need to understand something strange and slow about how bikes actually get made. This is not an industry where you can react quickly. A bike shop can't just call up a factory and get more bikes next week. The supply chain is long and it's rigid, and during the chaos of those years, it got slower still. Lead times for some components stretched out by a factor of 3, 4, or more. To have bikes to sell in a given season, a brand often has to place its orders a year or even 2 years in advance. Think about what that means. You are betting today on how many bikes people will want 2 summers from now. And in the middle of a once-in-a-lifetime demand spike, with factories warning that if you didn't order big, you might get nothing at all, every brand in the world placed the same bet. They ordered enormous quantities of bikes, far, far more than they would ever need. There's a name for what happened next, and it's beautifully descriptive. It's called the bullwhip effect. Picture cracking a whip. A small flick at the handle becomes a huge, violent snap at the tip. In a supply chain, a modest change in customer demand at one end gets amplified, order by order, into a massive swing at the factory end. A little extra demand from riders became a lot of extra orders from shops, which became an absolutely gigantic wave of production at the factories. And all of this took so long to move through the pipeline that by the time those oceans of bikes were actually built, shipped, and stacked in warehouses, the world had changed.
If you want one image for this whole era, picture that container ship wedged sideways across the Suez Canal, blocking the world's cargo, while behind it a tidal wave of bicycles no one would soon want kept right on coming. Because out in the real world, the boom was ending. The gyms reopened, the commutes came back. People who'd bought a bike in the frenzy already had one. Demand didn't just cool, it fell off a cliff, and the bikes kept arriving anyway, late, out of season, by the millions. The numbers tell the story starkly. Those imports that had surged toward 18 million collapsed to around 13 million within a couple of years, and brands found themselves sitting on 3 to 5 times more inventory than they should ever have had. Warehouses full, showrooms full, a mountain of bicycles built for a demand that had evaporated, and every single one of them costing money just to sit there. So what do you do when you're a company drowning in unsold bikes, bleeding cash just to store them, with next year's models already on the way? You do the only thing you can. You cut prices. You discount and discount and discount again, trying to turn all that frozen inventory back into cash before it sinks you. And this is the exact...
And here's where it gets genuinely painful. Because the damage didn't stay hidden in spreadsheets, it became real. Some brands managed to sell more bikes than ever and still watch their profits collapse, because every sale was at a wounding discount. One major component maker reported rising sales, but saw its operating profit fall by around a fifth in a single year. A giant of the industry predicted a return to profit and instead posted a decline of more than 40%. Across the sector, the mood curdled from optimism into survival. The unofficial motto became simply, "Survive to 2025." And then 2025 arrived, and for many, the finish line turned out to be just the start of another headwind. The human cost of all this is the part the price tags never show you. Brands didn't just suffer, they died. One industry analysis estimated that well over 100 bike brands disappeared in a single year. Names people trusted, companies with decades of history. And the pain was not shared equally. By many accounts, it fell hardest on the bike shops, the small, local businesses at the very end of that whip, who got handed inventory they hadn't chosen and were left to sell it into a collapsing market. People lost their jobs, whole companies vanished. This is the true price of that fire sale, and it was paid by real people long before you ever saw the discount. And it's worth pausing on the shops in particular, because they sit at the cruelest point in this whole chain. A local bike shop doesn't get to decide how many bikes to build. It gets handed them. For decades, the arrangement worked in one direction. The big brands pushed.
When demand was high, that system hummed. When demand collapsed, it turned into a trap. The shop was left holding rows of bikes it never chose, in a market where the only way to move them was to slash the price below what made any sense, competing not just with other shops, but with the brand's own discounted website. Many of these were family businesses, the kind of place that teaches a kid to ride and fixes your flat for free. Some of them simply could not survive being at the thin end of that whip. When you read that 100 brands disappeared, that's a headline. The shop that closed on your local corner is what it actually felt like. Now, I want to be careful here because it would be easy to turn this into a story about villains, and it isn't one. Nobody set out to wreck the industry. This was a slow-motion accident born from a genuine surge in demand, an impossibly rigid supply chain, and a very human tendency to believe that good times will last. But there is one deeper, quieter problem underneath all of it that made the crash worse, and it's something the marketing will never tell you. In modern cycling, there is remarkably little real difference between many bikes. As much as 90% of the world's carbon frames come out of just a handful of factories in China and Taiwan, often using techniques that have barely changed in 20 years. And once those frames are built, most brands hang the very same drivetrains on them from the same 2 or 3 component makers. So beneath the paint and the logos and the marketing stories, a huge number of bikes are, mechanically, close cousins. And when products are that similar, there's only one place left to compete: price, which is exactly the weapon that ended up bleeding everyone dry.
So let's finally bring this home to you, the person standing in front of that beautiful, heavily discounted bike, trying to decide. Because the honest truth is that this is genuinely a remarkable time to buy. The bargains are real. But a bargain and a risk can come wrapped in the very same package, and knowing how to tell them apart is the difference between a brilliant purchase and an expensive mistake. So here is how to buy through a crash without getting hurt. First, understand what a discount is really telling you. A deep price cut can mean healthy excess stock being cleared, which is great for you. Or it can mean a company gasping for air on its way down. The discount alone can't tell you which, so look past the number and look at the brand's health. And this brings us to the single most important thing most buyers never think about: the warranty. A warranty is only ever as strong as the company standing behind it, and in a crash, companies fall. Let me show you exactly how that plays out, because a real case makes it unforgettable. One of the biggest direct-to-consumer electric bike brands in North America went from over $300 million in revenue at its peak to a fraction of that in just a few years, cycling through 4 different chief executives before finally filing for bankruptcy. It was bought out of that bankruptcy by another company, and here is the detail that should stay with you forever. Under the new owner,
that is what a warranty is worth when the company behind it collapses. So protect yourself. If you're buying from a brand under obvious financial stress, go in with your eyes open. Keep every receipt, register the product, save the confirmation. Because if there's a bankruptcy and a buyer, documentation is your only leverage. Think hard about parts and service too. When a brand dies, its bikes become orphans. And if that bike is built around proprietary parts, you may not be able to fix it at any price a few years down the line. This is where electric bikes deserve special caution. A regular bike is mostly universal parts, so even an orphan frame can usually be kept alive. But an e-bike lives or dies by its battery, its motor, and its electronics, and those are often proprietary and brand-specific. When the brand vanishes, so can your ability to ever replace them. A cheap e-bike from an unknown name that might not exist next year is not the same bargain as a cheap regular bike. It's a much bigger gamble. The used market deserves a mention too, because it's part of the same story. All that turmoil pushed secondhand values down, and for a savvy buyer, that's an opportunity. But the same rules apply, only more so. A used bike from a dead brand with worn proprietary parts can be a trap dressed as a deal. A used bike from a healthy brand with standard components can be one of the best values in all of cycling right now. There's even a signal hidden in used prices themselves. When they start creeping back up, as they've quietly begun to, it's one of the earliest hints that the glut is finally clearing and the market is steadying. A used bike isn't just a purchase, it's a little barometer of where the whole industry is heading.
And be wary as well of deals that look too good from unfamiliar online-only names or big-box stores. A price means nothing if there's no one left to service the bike, and many local shops won't touch a machine they didn't sell. Before you buy anything online or from a warehouse, it's worth confirming that a real shop near you would actually be willing to work on it. That one phone call, made before you pay, can save you from owning a bike that nobody in your town will lay a wrench on. So where does that leave us? The industry, for what it's worth, is showing a few green shoots. Used prices have begun to firm up. Shops have mostly worked through their gluts, even if some suppliers are still sitting on a time bomb of expensive stock. The biggest players talk hopefully of a gradual return to something like normal, though they've been wrong before, and the world has a way of throwing new shocks just as things settle. What's certain is that the Great Bike Crash was never really about people falling out of love with cycling. Demand didn't disappear. What happened was an industry that mistook a spike for a plateau, ordered for a future that never came, and then spent years discounting its way out of the hole, brand by brand, shop by shop, job by job. And that leaves you, the buyer, in a genuinely strange position. You are being handed some of the best prices the sport has ever offered, precisely because so many people upstream are hurting. That's not a reason to feel guilty, and it's not a reason to stay away. It's a reason to buy wisely. Chase the bargains, absolutely, because many of them are the real thing. But look past the size of the discount to the health of the brand behind it. Guard your warranty like it's part of the price, because in a crash, it is.
Favor standard parts over proprietary ones, especially with anything electric. And remember the one lesson this whole disaster teaches better than any other. In an industry where so many bikes are quietly the same underneath, the thing you're really buying isn't just the frame. It's the promise that someone will still be there tomorrow to stand behind it. Get that right, and this really can be the best time in a generation to buy a bike. Get it wrong, and that unbeatable bargain becomes the most expensive cheap bike you ever bought.